All right, let's move on to Epstein. How did you get the Black Book?
Well, I, the Franklin scandal was published in 2009, 2010, and I started looking into Epstein in about 2012. With Epstein, there was a very corrupt grand jury, and I've already explained how easy it is to corrupt grand juries. I didn't know
Mhm.
how corrupt it was a little until I got down the road with the investigation. But with Epstein, I felt like something was wrong. I just because I'd spent so many years investigating the Franklin scandal. So in 2012, I flew down to Florida to look into Epstein, and I'd really, I mean, the Franklin scandal, that investigation had taken a huge toll on me, and it had really affected me economically. But I, I said, I got to get it together. I got to investigate this. And then when I got down to Florida and started investigating it, I'm pretty good at pounding the pavement. And I ultimately got a hold of Epstein's Black Book. And ultimately, what happened there was
How did you get that?
someone gave it to me.
Okay, I was gonna say, it's not like you just happened across it somewhere, in a public library.
Yeah,
I mean,
I was sitting at a bus stop and someone gave it.
yes.
No, so I got the Black Book,
Uh-huh.
and then there's like scores of victims in the Black Book. In addition to like the power broker, there's scores of victims, and I started calling the girls, and they were talking about being flown around and flown to this island. And at that point, I realized I was dealing with another Franklin like network, and there had been a grand jury that covered it up.
Now, at this point, you said that you started investigating this in 2012. Epstein had already been charged and convicted, but he ended up with a sweetheart deal for pet. What was it exactly in
Okay,
2008?
what happened there was a grand jury, and the grand jury, the special prosecutor Barry Kirshner, only called one of Epstein's victims, and at that point, there were statements from five. The Palm Beach Police Department had statements from five kids, victims, but then they were aware of 17 more. So at that point, law enforcement is aware of 22 victims. And that very corrupt prosecutor only called one of the victims and skewered her. And that's why that grand jury said there was absolutely no child abuse involved with Epstein. But what happened there was the Palm Beach police chief, Michael Ryder, who's one of the real heroes in this story, he just went ballistic. And he took a lot of heat. I mean, he was followed and stuff was put on his front door steps. I mean, it was, but he wouldn't back down, and he started complaining to the feds, and that's when the feds got involved. And so the feds had the state tack on a child abuse charge.
Hmm.
Epstein was looking at 15 years for the child abuse, and that grand jury had indicted him on one count of adult pandering. So he was looking at 20 years. And he got 18 months in the county jail. And actually, he had to serve 13 months, and he could get out. They let him out during the day, and he could molest young girls and then go back and sleep in his cell at night. He had pretty much fixed that wing of the jail up to kind of look like the Taj Mahal. And he'd given the law enforcement lots of money too. I mean, these guys were given. He gave them lots of money to so he wouldn't have to deal with the other things that other prisoners have to deal with.
So you start investigating Epstein. You get the Black Book. Somebody gives you this. How did they get it?
What happened there was Alfredo Rodriguez was the house manager of Epstein,
Mm.
and he ripped it off, and he was trying to sell it to one of the attorneys at that point that were starting civil lawsuits against Jeffrey Epstein. And the attorney called the FBI, and the FBI did a sting on Rodriguez, and
Mm,
that's how they got the black book. And
okay.
and then eventually that black book wended its way to me.
Okay.
But it was ultimately the FBI that impounded the black book.
So, you started calling the victims, and these women were talking about how when they were young, they were being flown around to these various different islands.
Yeah, and some of them were still young. I mean, some of them were still in their teens. That's one of the great misnomers about Jeffrey Epstein is the media and the government have colluded. I say colluded and decided that the youngest of these girls was 14 years old. But actually, these girls were, some of them were younger than 10 years old.
Younger than 10?
Younger than 10, yes.
Why is that not made it out into the media? What has
Well,
stopped that?
well I mean, the media has just been ethical eunuchs about this. I mean, no major media in the United States of America has called for justice. They're
Mhm.
very good at digging up salacious dirt about Jeffrey Epstein, but no media has called for justice. I just find it mind boggling. You've got these little girls being trafficked with impunity, and all as our media can do is dig up salacious dirt. It's really it's it's so abominable
Yeah.
what how the media has followed the government has covered this up, but the way that the media has taken its cue is all media is really, really heinous.
So, Acosta says that Jeffrey Epstein, he was told to leave it alone because Epstein was intelligence. Which
Yes.
intelligence do we think Epstein? I mean, I've always believed Israeli intelligence, Mossad. There's connections there with Ghislaine Maxwell and her father. What have you been thinking during your investigation?
I mean, political blackmail is as old as politics itself. It's people are very naive about that. I'll give you a couple of examples. Alexander Hamilton was having an affair with a 23-year-old who was married, and her husband was blackmailing him. And then a muckraking journalist got a hold of the story and outed Alexander Hamilton in his affair.
Mm,
And Jefferson and Hamilton were very antagonistic towards Thomas Jefferson. And when Jefferson got elected president, that muckraker who outed Hamilton's affair, um, Jefferson wouldn't give him a job in his administration. So he outed Jefferson as having sex with one of his slaves, Sally Hemings, which has been shown to be true. Again, it's been political blackmail is as old. I mean, as long as it's just status quo. I mean, the KGB, the CIA, they've been using political blackmail forever. I mean, people don't think that the CIA is going to use political blackmail. They're using political blackmail in Europe, that they're not going to use it here.
right.
Now Epstein might have been affiliated with the Mossad. Here is my thoughts on that. Epstein might have been affiliated with the Mossad, but there's no way that the CIA is going to let the Mossad compromise American politicians on American soil and not get a cut of the intelligence.
Right.
That's just not going to happen. So it could have been the Mossad and CIA colluding, or it could have been the CIA by itself. It's one of
Yeah.
the and
Right. Yeah. I think you're right on that. It definitely was. If that's the situation, then I think it was both. But certainly, I think you're right that the CIA wouldn't allow for a blackmail operation of that size with those political figures to happen without them being in on it too. Like, hey,
yes,
we want some of that dirt, not just you. You don't get to just keep the dirt. We want the dirt too.
there's just no way that would happen.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting. I'll give you a couple of examples of guys that are compromised. Larry Craig was in Washington, D.C. for 25 years.
Hmm.
He was a very conservative, first a congressman and then a senator. And he had the worst rights. He was the worst as far as voting against gay rights.
Hmm.
And I wrote a book called Confessions of a DC Madam after the Franklin scales, Confessions of a DC Madam, the politics of sex, lies, and blackmail. And it, It was about Henry Vincent, who ran a gay escort service. Now, Larry Craig was getting prostitutes from male prostitutes from Henry Vincent, and that dark roguish element of the CIA, they were working with Vincent. I mean, anybody that was calling Vincent um, and ordering prostitutes, they were on it. And but Larry Craig was actually, he was getting prostitutes from other sources too. So here's a family values guy
Mm-hmm.
that has like the worst record voting for gay rights, and he's a complete sex addict, a gay sex addict. And he was busted in an airport in Minneapolis trying to pick up a vice officer. That's how out of control his libido was. And he's a
Right.
senator. I mean, a kid with a smartphone could compromise this guy. I
Right.
mean,
Right.
so it's it's not. And Dennis Hastert, the Speaker of the House for 7 years, he had child molestation going back 40 or 50 years. I mean, he
Mm-hmm.
and nothing happened. And the FBI knew about his shadow life. A FBI whistleblower named Sibel Edmonds talked about the FBI knowing about Hastert, but nothing happened to him while he was Speaker of the House. But it's kind of interesting. He was taken down afterwards,
Mm-hmm.
and one of his victims was blackmailing him, and and this is what I don't understand. If the FBI really wanted to stop that, they could have gone to the blackmailer and said, "Stop blackmailing Dennis Hastert, or bad things are going to happen to you." But instead, they went after Hastert. So I think Hastert decided to get off the yacht in a way. I think that he felt like he could do whatever he wanted because he was making millions and millions of dollars doing. He started a consulting business,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that he probably stepped on some toes with all the money that he was making. Somebody probably wanted a cut of that, and at that point, he got too big for his britches, and he was taken down.